All right, so I'm going to cut forward to a question that I kind of buried a few minutes ago because it's just coming into my mind with everything you're saying. But the thing that kind of keeps me up at night when I'm wondering about how these civilizations worked is the technological aspect. Because, and you hinted at this earlier, like there's certain things where they were way more advanced potentially, but certain things where we have evidence to say they were not nearly as advanced. And so I always go back to what I know and what's in my hand. And like I have an iPhone in my hand. But I would imagine a lot of that would be destroyed. Is there a possibility that some of I'm not saying the one you're talking about right now, but perhaps some of these other civilizations that date back across all these different Younger Dryas periods, let's call it, like these different events that could have happened, is there a possibility that there were civilizations that existed with hardcore artificial intelligence and things way beyond iPhones that was just so destroyed over and over again that like we have no ability to ever even try to find evidence of it?
This is what's funny, and it parallels our civilization so on point. When we're trying to find what's left from them, we find that the more advanced the civilization became, the less they put the work into recording that. It was weird. So for instance, there's not a single writing left behind from Atlantis. Because they didn't do cuneiform writing into stones. They probably had paper and they probably had digital records.
Digital.
The reason I say that is that we've found some really weird artifacts in the Mediterranean over the last 100 years. There was an artifact found off of Greece that has mechanical components in it that don't make sense. I don't remember what it is off my head.
So this is the one Michio Kaku talked about. This was down at the bottom of the Mediterranean.
That's it. Thank you.
It was a computer around
Thank you.
From the Roman era, I believe. It was about 2,000 years old, and what it did, and he explained why it was considered a computer.
Yeah.
But what it did was it would measure, I think it was like the constellations or something like that.
Yeah.
I'm definitely going to have interspliced that clip into here, so we'll have the context of it out of the real man's mouth explaining it.
Around 1900 or so, there was a shipwreck off the coast of Greece, and divers found an instrument encrusted in coral. It looked like a piece of junk. But when they cleaned it, they realized, no, it's a machine that is 2,000 years old. And then they took x-rays of it, and they realized it's a computer. My God, a computer. They think a computer that was supposed to be a gift to Julius Caesar. But the ship sunk, and it was there at the bottom of the Mediterranean for 2,000 years until divers found it. And when they moved the coral away, they found out that it was a computer. It was an analog computer that modeled the universe. The universe known at that time, Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, like a planetarium. A little planetarium that you could put on a desktop that modeled the known universe 2,000 years ago.
But that, I'm glad you brought that up. That blew my mind. I'm going to look up the name of the town
Artifact
where that was from. But yeah, go ahead.
So, and again, I don't study that aspect of history. Like, there's a lot of people that take these lost artifacts and they try to place them. I think it's fascinating. I only bring it up just to say, look, we don't know how advanced Atlantis became. We know some things when we go into the records, and I think this is probably an important point to make before people think that I'm just spouting off something that Plato made as an allegory.
Antikythera was the name, by the way.
Okay, thank you.
I had to get that right.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
We have so much emerging evidence that Atlantis was real, and not only that, but other civilizations, that it's becoming overwhelming. I want everyone for a second just to take a step back and be like, I don't care about Plato's story right now. Let's put that off the side. I'm so sick of people saying that that's the only reason Atlantis is around or exists because of Plato. That's not true.
Can you give the context of that for people who aren't familiar?
Yeah. People will say, a lot of mainstream will say that Plato made up the entire story of Atlantis based on an allegory to compare against the pre-Greek culture to show their superiority as democracy versus an empire. He's got all kinds of stories in that. But what I would point out is, no, he only used the example of what was real to then show. Because we're working on releasing the new season of Ancient Civilizations 5 on Gaia. And what we do is we go deep into telling the actual evidence to prove Atlantis existed in a way that nobody else has. But not only that, to prove that there was another rival civilization that existed at the same time called the ancient Athenians, the pre-Greeks. Now,
and how many years are we going back with this?
We're going back over at least 20,000 years because Plato gives us the date of Atlantis' destruction. So we don't know when Atlantis was created, but we know when it was destroyed. Atlantis was destroyed 2,000 years before Plato existed. So we're talking about, or before Solan. So we're talking about not 2,000 years. We're talking about a date, a time period of around 10,600 years or so.
And who was Solan?
Solan is basically an Athenian Greek priest or poet who is the first person from the outside world to come into Egypt and learn about this ancient history that they didn't know. And I haven't even told the story of Atlantis yet. Well,
let's stay on that. I don't want to get you off it.
Yeah, I don't want to. So what we need to point out is that the story doesn't come from Plato. The story comes from much earlier ancestors. It comes from a man named Solan, who came before Socrates. Okay, Solan was a Greek poet and philosopher who was the first person from the outside world to travel to Egypt thousands of years ago. This is before the Roman Empire went and basically destroyed Egypt. And I think that's important for us to understand. Yeah. What happened was Solan goes and visits this incredible temple called the Temple of Sais, S-A-I-S. And it was a real temple, and there's been art depictions drawn of it because it was destroyed after Solan left. We don't know exactly how long, but after Solan learned about the story I'm about to tell you and left, within the next 1,000 years, the Temple of Sais didn't exist any longer. Somebody destroyed it. Somebody wiped this story that I'm about to tell you. Solan goes down. He finds this incredible temple near Heliopolis in Egypt. And he finds this elder priest named Sanchez. Okay, Sanchez, this is a name for people that want to look it up. And he had a bunch of other priests with him, but Sanchez was a special kind of priest. He was an elder priest that knew absolutely ancient, I mean, like, I say absolutely in quotes. He knew ancient history so old that it wasn't really even recorded by most other places in the world anymore.
And how did he know that, allegedly?
The Temple of Sais had inscriptions writing the entire history of Earth down. The Temple of Sais was supposed to be, like the Library of Alexandria, not that far away, that was supposed to be a library of the works of people through literature and all these things. But the Temple of Sais was supposed to be this way to record our history. And it's described that these priests were, the single thing they were supposed to do, there was nothing else, was to maintain the story of history. And they had this entire story of this ancient civilization called Atlantis written into their walls. And they say that Egypt came out of Atlantis. And what he says is, Solan, you Greeks remember one deluge, but there have been many that have come before, primarily of water and fire. It goes on to tell him that what we think of as the old world is not even that old, and that there's ancient chapters of civilizations that have come, risen, been destroyed, and then tried to rise up. But every time they were destroyed, more and more knowledge was lost and not less. So Sanchez tells Solan this entire story, and he takes it back and he tells it to two people. He tells it to Diodorus, who's another Greek philosopher. I love Diodorus. I wish people would lean more on Diodorus than Plato for the story of Atlantis. Diodorus, and he told Socrates. Plato wasn't even around yet. That's what people don't know, is that it wasn't, and Socrates didn't feel like it was, he believed that we shouldn't write things down because they can be misunderstood, which is kind of silly because he used to give talks, and eventually he was poisoned by his own government. Just so you know, he was killed. Socrates was murdered by his own government for speaking out. And when that happened, Plato...
That's sketchy.
Plato talks about how it was like losing a father, and how he then took up the role of writing every piece of knowledge that Socrates had taught. Socrates was like his great mentor. He taught everything to Plato. So he took on this task of writing everything that Socrates had told him. But knowing that Socrates, this is why I need people to understand this. Knowing Socrates had just been murdered by their own government, poisoned, because of speaking out, he couldn't write the story of Atlantis down. So he woven it into, put it into an allegorical story so that people would, like, the truth would be preserved, but also they would think it's an allegory and it's not real.
Thank you for watching the video, guys. Please hit that subscribe button and check out this clip's full podcast episode by clicking here or in the description below.